Good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Lauri Regan, and on behalf of MEF, I want to thank you for joining today and for your continued support of our important work. As we approach the end of the year, please do consider making a donation through the link on our website, as your support remains critical to our ability to continue working on these existential issues on which we focus. We're joined this afternoon by Ahmed Fouad Alkhatib, who is a resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Middle East programs, where he writes extensively on Gaza's political and humanitarian affairs, is an outspoken critic of Hamas, and promotes a radically pragmatic approach to peace and Palestinian statehood. He also leads the organization Realigned for Palestine. Ahmed grew up in Gaza City and will be sharing his insights and thoughts today on whether the ceasefire will hold or whether war will return to Gaza. Ahmed will speak for about 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. So if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A or chat function at the bottom of your screens to enter your submission, and we'll do our best to get to as many of your questions as possible. Please do limit your submissions to questions only. Today's podcast is being recorded and will be available for future viewing, so please do share the link with those in your network who would be interested in learning more on this timely topic. Welcome, Ahmed, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I hand the floor over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Apologies for the slight delay there. So my name is Ahmed. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. at the Atlantic Council. And I'll just very briefly share a little bit about myself. I came here as an exchange student from Gaza and was unable to return due to Hamas's control of the territory and the abduction of Gilad Shalit. I was stuck in Egypt, about to cross back into Gaza, but unfortunately, I was unable to. And so thanks to the support of human rights and peace activists in the United States, I was able to come back here, apply for asylum. And ironically, the very day of my political asylum interview in the United States was June 14th, 2007, which is the very day that Hamas took over the Gaza Strip and ejected the Palestinian Authority from the coastal enclave. I became a citizen of the United States 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, and been on a mission to try to, even as I have pursued a variety of professional opportunities, to really leverage my lived experience and challenge the entrenched narratives. Even when before October 7th, I had done a lot of work. 10 years ago, I actually tried to build an internationally run Israeli-approved airfield that Hamas would have no control over in the Gaza Strip to facilitate freedom of movement. And so I got to develop a network of Palestinians on the ground, in addition to my own biological family. You know, I have two brothers and two sisters, and my dad, for example, who passed away 5 years ago, but he worked for UNRWA, the not so controversial UN agency. But I grew up in the UNRWA system. My dad ran the UNRWA refugee clinic in Jabalia in northern Gaza, which is one of the biggest refugee camps in the Gaza Strip. My middle brother ran the UNRWA clinic in the beach camp, which is one of the second biggest refugee camps in Gaza. My oldest brother is on the ground right now as we speak, running the field operations in southern Gaza for one of the largest medical NGOs, British international medical NGOs. And this brother was actually in our family home when it was bombed and destroyed early on in the war by an Israeli airstrike that was part of 3 different strikes that ultimately killed 34 of my immediate and extended family members. And he pushed his way out of the rubble. I got his wife and 4 children out. And yet I decided I wanted to ultimately break away from the vicious cycle of hatred, incitement, violence, revenge, rinse and repeat, and connecting with hostage families and survivors of October 7th. So as far as Gaza, so that's a little bit about myself. As far as Gaza and where it stands right now, I mean, there are multiple threads that I think are really important. I'll just share them very briefly and happy to digest in the Q&A. But most importantly, you have Hamas is fully back in control of the Gaza Strip, of the part that is called the red zone, if you will. That's the area, the 50% of Gaza or so beyond the yellow line. We all know about the yellow line that roughly bisects Gaza in 2, with the idea of controlling the eastern part and Hamas controlling the western part, where the majority of the population is. So I have an army of friends, contacts, informants, activists, people that I'm in touch with on a daily basis in Gaza. And my brother is a marginal source of information. But nevertheless, yesterday I was speaking to my brother and a variety of other people working with NGOs, and they all just kind of sighed and just said Hamas is behaving as if we hadn't just lived under 2 years of war, meaning they're demanding NGOs give them action reports of who are you talking with, who's giving you money, who's coming in and out, what's in your warehouses, what's in your inventories, who are you communicating with. Activists, I have friends of mine who have sent me pictures and videos and documentation of what happens at the Mawasi humanitarian zone, as far as how Hamas has fully imposed its will, if you will, on the population. The three main hospitals of Gaza, the Shifa in Gaza City in the north, the Al-Aqsa and Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, and Khan Nasser in southern Gaza and Khan Yunis, have become basically makeshift Hamas headquarters, whereby the majority of there are three ministries that are operating out of there. There's the Ministry of Interior, and that's where the torture, that's where any activists, remember when they were breaking people's legs and knees and shooting them? The Qataris told them don't film that anymore, but that very much so still happens on a daily basis. And so a friend of mine was actually arrested and sent in Khan Yunis and placed in a cage with 8 other people in the middle of beeping medical equipment and hearing other people, and he was attacked in his tent, and his mom and his 2 sisters, whom I've been trying to get out, were beaten, and I have the videos, and he told me to release everything in case Hamas kills him. So then the second ministry that's operating out of, and this will tie to the second thread, the second ministry is the Ministry of Economy. And that is a key component of Hamas's control of Gaza, the so-called Ministry of Economy, because what it does is it's facilitating the taxation on all commercial goods, and it's facilitating all sorts of thefts of aid that we've known about, all sorts of taxation on the use of public land. They've now, for example, people that were pitching tents in the middle of the war on government land, they're now getting receipts from Hamas saying, "Oh yeah, you used government territory to pitch your tent while there was a war. You now owe the government 400 shekels, 500 shekels, etc." So the Ministry of the Economy is taxing 50% commercial trucks and goods that are going in at 50%. What is commercial trucks, real quick? There's 2 types of trucks that are going in through Kerem Shalom since the ceasefire. There's the humanitarian supplies and goods, World Food Program, United Nations, other humanitarian NGOs. And then there's commercial trucks that are carrying items you might find in a supermarket, or items that businessmen and merchants are bringing in. Well, the latter category is now being taxed at 50%. So let's say one truck is going to cost you 10,000 shekels, which is roughly, I don't know, $2,500, let's say. You have to, on top of that, factor in 5,000 shekels. So that truck is going to cost you 10,000 shekels plus 5,000 that's going to go to taxation and a protection racket for Hamas. And it is mandatory. I mean, the joke is, if you're a real man, try not to pay that money. So the Ministry of Economy imposes that money. And then the final ministry is the Ministry of Finance. And that Ministry of Finance collects the money. So, and in between those 3 ministries now that have been, so they each basically get a section, get a room in all of the 3 hospitals that I've shared with you. And now when they call someone, they suspect someone of wrongdoing, or they want to do deals with someone or whatever, where should I meet you? Meet us at this hospital, at this hospital, at that hospital. So we now have Hamas returning. We now have basically what everybody in Gaza, what a small child in Gaza knew during the war, but no one dared say anything, which is that Hamas was using medical infrastructure, hospitals, schools, to cowardly hide in there. And then stepping back a little bit, because I want to wrap up and open it up for questions. There are open-ended challenges right now. The International Stabilization Force, which I am a big proponent of, or was, there's a gap that I think has grown irreconcilable to the point where I think it's flatlined. It's effectively dead, and either Trump revives it or khalas, it's finished. The gap between enforcing the disarmament, which means confronting Hamas, taking away individual weapons, going after the tunnels, and ensuring that there's a monopoly on violence and arms in Gaza, versus what Arabs and Muslims have been, and potential participants have been talking about, which is, no, actually, we're not going to confront Hamas. And I've met senior officials from multiple countries. It ain't happening. No Arab or Muslim country is sending anybody to fight Hamas. This is why I proposed an interim solution, if you will, which is to form a strike group of the ISF, International Stabilization Force, that's made up of private military contractors who can go in a small targeted fashion, take on Hamas, and then the ISF can come in and mop up. Then there's the issue of how do you build organic Palestinian forces from Gaza who have to be from there to actually sustainably take over the control of the Gaza Strip. Then you have interference from Qatar and Turkey, whom, in my personal assessment, have played the Trump administration and have manipulated it to be in a position where you are right now, such that there is no alternative to Hamas. Hamas has to be recycled as part of the next phase. And finally, the challenge that I'm experiencing, and I know we have a lot of folks here probably on the ground in Israel. I mean, I hear what everybody hears. I have folks who are in the CMCC, the Civil Military Coordination Center. But most of the second phase remains highly theoretical. And so I'm very concerned that we've let too much time pass between phase 1 and phase 2. I'm very concerned that Hamas actually has truly, I mean, they might be evil, but they're far from stupid, has truly engineered, with Qatari and Turkish help, a situation where now Indonesia went from, we're going to send 20,000 troops, to, oh, we're going to send 1,500, and they're going to be a situation, they're going to be doctors and clerks and nurses, where the Azeris from Azerbaijan are like, well, actually, we're not going to send in troops unless the fighting is finished. And it's like, wait, what did you think? You want your soldiers to just sit on TikTok in your armored vehicles? That's what you thought? The Pakistanis are now saying basically, well, actually, if the mandate requires fighting Hamas, then like we want nothing to do with this. And so that's what concerns me right now. And I see the return of war as a matter of time. It may not look exactly like the war that we had prior to the ceasefire 2 months ago. What it will ultimately entail is a ladder of escalation, with escalating airstrikes like we're seeing daily, and an attempt to further squeeze Hamas in. The question is how invested, and I'll stop here. How invested is President Trump and the Trump administration in preserving the political capital that was expended in making this deal happen? And is he willing to walk away from this, having let the hostages out, having brought some calm to the region? Certainly, I've heard some of his top advisors and right hand men say something to that effect, that they themselves are willing to accept that as a possibility. I'm still not convinced that we're yet at a place where President Trump is 100% willing to walk away from this and let Israel go back fully to war. Only time will tell. So I will stop right here. Thank you for hearing me out. And yeah, Lauri, take us away.
Thanks, Ahmed. That was really terrific and very informative, a good overview. There are a lot of questions, but I'm going to take the liberty as the moderator of asking the first one. And I'd love for you to share, what the status of the various clans are that are in opposition to Hamas. For instance, last week there was an anti-Hamas militia leader, Yasser Abu Shabab, who was killed, providing a significant blow to efforts challenging Hamas. And you've posted about the horrors, and you just discussed, some of the horrors that Hamas has inflicted on Gazans who do dare to speak out. So, are there Gazans who are able to stand up to Hamas at this point? And weren't there militias that Israel had also armed and trained? And is anybody left that, or have they just either jailed, tortured to death, or murdered everybody?
Well, so as far as Abu Shabab himself, I would say it was more of a symbolic blow in the sense that, I mean, he really opened Pandora's box. He opened the floodgates. He was the first that was openly identified with the idea of armed rebellion against Hamas, but also somewhat normalizing and navigating this idea of receiving support and money and resources from Israel. Nevertheless, his deputy who took over, and I've had multiple chances to interview his deputy and get to know him very closely. And I'm saying this not as an endorsement, just as a strictly as an analytical point of view. Ghassan Dehani, I would argue he was the head of operations. He's a far more savvy, publicly presentable component of the militia. Yes, he comes with the baggage of having been part of Jaish al-Islam, the Army of Islam, which was an Al-Qaeda adjacent group, something like 20 years ago. And they were potentially part of the abduction of Gilad Shalit, but he had long left that and has been imprisoned by Hamas. And so, and I imagine the Shin Bet and the IDF had made their own assessments of him. But as far as the clans themselves, they've been thoroughly deterred by Hamas, unfortunately. They've been thoroughly tamed, if you will, because Hamas has gone after a lot of their inventory of weapons and armaments. You have to keep in mind that a lot of these clans, historically, while Hamas kind of brought them under its wing, a lot of these clans, there's two types of Gazans. 2/3 are considered refugees, 1/3 are considered native. A lot of these clans are all considered natives. The natives are the Bedouins, are the tribes, are the Hamulas, are the folks that were Gaza natives before 1948. And most of Hamas's ranks come from refugees. Most of Hamas's ranks are descendants of folks that went through the UNRWA system, if you will. And so it is only a matter of when there's an opportunity for them to strike back at Hamas, they will avenge all of the killing that Hamas has inflicted upon them since the ceasefire. So that's something and that in and of itself may not be super positive. I mean, I want Hamas to be targeted, obviously, but I just worry that might happen in a way that foments, at a sensitive time, at a transitional time, that foments chaos rather than actually brings in stability.
Thank you. Going back to Trump, someone has asked whether you think that there's enough will on the part of the Trump administration to block Qatar and Turkey from being part of the ISF. Let's talk about, and then somebody else asked if you wanted to see Tony Blair as part of the peacekeeping force. What are your thoughts on the ISF and what this administration you hope to see do?
Certainly. So do I think Trump, I mean, I think the Israelis have enough of a veto power, and quite frankly, I'm glad the Israelis said no and to not allowing Turkish troops to be part of the ISF. I actually would hope that Turkey can support on kind of marginal roles, not with ISF, with Gaza's recovery. Like, I have this vision of the Turks have this power generation ship that I want them to dock offshore, and it can generate something like 470 megawatts of power that can basically power a lot of Gaza. But beyond that, now I don't think the Trump administration is going to block Turkey and Qatar from the second phase of the peace process, of the deal, of the ceasefire that really thus far, I mean, I know it's aspirationally a peace plan, but it's just a ceasefire plan. No disrespect to the Trump administration. So that's the conflict that we have, is that tactically Israel will be able to forestall some direct involvement by Qatar and Turkey, but strategically, I think the president and the administration, particularly if you've seen the alignment on some other regional topics, and we've seen how many concessions basically Qatar got after the Israeli airstrike, I don't think they're going to be blocked, and I think that's bad. I think that's terrible. I think that's a problem. And I think that's antagonized the Saudis and the Emiratis and the UAE not wanting to be involved in something that the Qataris crafted. Furthermore, as far as the like the the Tony Blair, um I met with Tony Blair. I think I mean, I think he's very functional because he has this massive infrastructure around him. Yes, he was associated with I think some of what made him radioactive is some of the Boston Consulting Group ideas. They talked about, oh, well, push people out. Like, people get all sensitive when I mean, and rightly so, about like, buy people out, let them leave, and Gaza, like turning Gaza into an investor playground rather than like a truly transformative space. But that wasn't entirely on Blair. And so that made him that antagonized some of the Arabs. I met with like senior Egyptian leadership, and they were very anti Tony Blair. And basically, I will tell you openly and like publicly, the Egyptians have blocked Tony Blair. The Egyptians are why. But here's the problem. What that has resulted in, because bless Kushner, bless Steve Woodcock, bless Aryeh Lightstone, they don't have the staffing. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have like Blair has the whole institute, and he spent this whole time putting together this work and this GITA, Gaza International Transitional Authority. And it literally had it down to the detail. And by icing Blair out, we're now in a situation where there is this bloody vacuum, this gap. And so I'm very upset about how that unfolded, because there was like the work product that he put out should and could have been recycled, even if he was going to be absent as a figurehead. But right now he's been completely iced out, and that's really problematic. One last thing is that I've heard, for example, and by the way, that's not just politically and big picture. Even like, for example, there were plans for Gita, Tony Blair's vision, to like have an account. Like right now, there's no money for anything. There's no money for the Jordanians or the Egyptians to train an alternative Palestinian security personnel body. There's no money for the ISF. There's no money for the CMCC. The U.S. is very adamant that it doesn't want to invest in nation building after Iraq and Afghanistan, and that goes against the ethos of President Trump. And so even operationally and tactically, the absence of Tony Blair has led to like the Qataris were supposed to dump $1 billion or $2 billion, but right now into the initial kind of this like, okay, like give us a tranche of money. But now that's politically untenable for the Netanyahu government, given the antagonism that exists towards his relationship with Qatar. So it's just a very unfortunate situation in which the people of Gaza are ultimately the victims, because this keeps Hamas on board. Meanwhile, what exactly are the Arabs that said no to Blair doing in the interim and instead?
Thanks, Ahmed. We've got a number of questions. I'm going to combine them because we are sort of running out of time a little bit. But somebody asked what percentage of the people of Gaza want to get rid of Hamas rule, and we haven't really talked about the sentiment of Gazan civilians. So maybe if you could spend a couple minutes talking about that. And I'm going to tie that to a question that someone asked about how you remove Hamas. This is a person actually from the UK who said that the Muslims he's spoken to there say that Hamas is an idea and you can't get rid of an idea. So if you can sort of talk about the sentiment of the Gazan people and Hamas as a
Let me
concept.
start backwards to the friend from the UK. I mean, I don't care. I could give two craps about an idea. 80 years later, there's still people that are into the Nazis. There's still people who are in Nazi stuff. There's still people who think the conquistadors or the crusades, like, I don't care about Hamas as an idea. What I care is about degrading them enough to where they're not a polity that's in control of Gaza. So I care about depriving them of control and therefore depriving them of relevance. But if they're just like the PFLP, for example, that was once upon a time the second largest Palestinian faction and the PLO after Fatah. And right now, they are like the most irrelevant thing. These guys connected with the Soviet Union, and they were so big that they split up and, into different groups. And where are they at right now? 40 years later, 50 years later, they're just an idea that is utterly irrelevant. So irrelevant that the communist, atheist Palestinians are now literally the tools, the little socks, the little shoes that Hamas wears and imposes. I have said this time and again, and I will put my reputation on the line. I will put my effort on the line, and I will never stop saying it. The majority of the people of Gaza are absolutely opposed to Hamas. They want their rule to be over. They want their rule to finish. They realize that Hamas has been a disaster. They see Hamas not just in terms of the consequences of October 7th and how deadly that was, but they see Hamas through the totality of the last 20 years since the disengagement. I left Gaza 1 month, July 2005, before the disengagement, the withdrawal of Israeli settlements. They very much so, the degradation of the standard of living, the departure of the Palestinian Authority, however corrupt they are. Everybody will tell you at least the PA were corrupt, but we still have a high standard of living. They see the thing about Hamas is at least the PA used nationalism and used the Palestinian National Project as its ethos. Hamas uses, it's kind of this disgusting ideology. It is almost like the Nazis in the sense of like using Islam and a certain strain of Islam to say like, we're merging nationalism with Gaza and Palestine, with resistance, with Jerusalem, with this, with that. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, we keep having this stubborn pollster, Khalil Shkaki, whom unfortunately Israelis regard as a god because he has been around for so long. Mind you, this is the dude who's the brother of the founder of Islamic Jihad, but we're going to dismiss that. He's not a, there's been the Zogby Institute, the Tony Blair Institute, 3 times funded by the UAE, and I've purview into the whole operation. During the war, did surveys, and Tony Blair asked them to do it, and they came out with completely different results, in which only 7% of Gazans want Hamas to stick around after the war, in which 87% of Gazans view Hamas as equally responsible as Israel for the destruction of Gaza. And that's big. They're like, who destroyed Gaza? Is it Israel or is it Hamas or is it? It's like, no, it's Hamas. Yes, Israel's bombing, but Hamas is what destroyed Gaza as well. So the IDF itself found documents that it published. You would think the IDF would have an interest in showing all Gazans as being Hamas. But no, to their credit, the IDF showed how Hamas has managed to manipulate these results. Now, I'm not at all minimizing. I'll wrap up, Lauri, real quick here. I'm not at all minimizing the fact that there is radicalization in Palestinian society. Being against Hamas does not, and by the way, I'm only talking about Gaza. I'm not talking about the West Bank, which has its own dynamics. I'm talking about the people who have been experiencing the worst chapter, the most destructive chapter in contemporary Palestinian history. Being against Hamas does not automatically mean you're for peace with Israel. There's a process that you got to take people along. But it is a fact that those 20,000 people who worked in Israel in the 1990s, like think about the hundreds of thousands that worked in Israel, like people's opinions and views are not static. They're elastic. They're subject to change. And so that's where I say this not to manufacture dissent where none exists, but to try to think of this as an opportunity. And I actually I am a believer in treating Gaza as its own separate. And the Arabs get mad when I say this. The Democrats, of which I'm a member, my own party did, like, oh my God, how dare you, two states forever. Like, no, I believe in treating Gaza as its own separate entity under the overall auspices of a aspirational state of Palestine that I think is inevitable, but as a federated system. I think Gaza should be its own statelet. I think it's small. I think it's got a geographic advantage in overlooking the Mediterranean. I think it's beautiful. I think it's highly addressable. I think Gaza should be part of IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. So my point about highlighting how most people in Gaza are against Hamas is to showcase the opportunity that we have and to exploit it from any opening. And instead, unfortunately, when I share this, I'm often met, and I get the frustration, but I'm often met with I'll be speaking to the biggest, Israeli journalists and pro-Israel think tankers. I'll be like, I just don't believe it, man. No, I'm not convinced. No, they're all. I saw what I saw on October 7th. There were a couple of thousand people that went in, so everybody had hostages underneath. So I invite us all to think of this as an opportunity to begin the 1,000-mile journey of shifting public opinion in Gaza, building upon the resentment that is real, that it's not reported in mainstream media, and compounding that and building upon it to begin the process of transformation.
Thank you, Ahmed. We could spend the entire afternoon on this conversation. It's an important one, and your insights were really appreciated. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank the audience for joining us. Wish we had more time. Please do join us on Wednesday with Ashley Perry's Israeli Insider at 3 p.m. And Ahmed, we look forward to having a conversation again in the future with you. So thank you. Wishing everybody a
Inshallah.
wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all so much. Cheers.